Halloween, a novel by Curtis Richards. Prologue. The horror started on the eve of Samhain, in a foggy vale in Northern Ireland at the dawn of the Celtic race, and once started it trod the earth forevermore, wreaking its savagery suddenly, swiftly, and with incredible ferocity. Then its lust sated, it shrank back into the mist of time for a year, a decade, a generation perhaps. But it slept only, and did not die, for it could not be killed. And on the eve before Samhain it would stir, and if the lust were powerful enough, it would rise to fulfill the curse invoked so many Samhains before. Then the people would bolt their doors. Scant good it did them, for the thing laughed at locks and bolts, and besides, there were the unwary, always the unwary. Samhain, the Druid festival of the dead. The summer had passed, and so too had that outburst of early fall warmth now known as Indian summer. The green had gone out of the land, the crops harvested, and the chill of winter had descended like an angel of death. The people, fearing the sun might never again warm the land, held their festival to appease Makala, their deity. On hillsides and in the caves and daub and wattle huts, great fires were lit to which the spirits of the departed were invited by their kinsmen to warm themselves, to be cheerful before the snows blanketed the earth. Druid priests divined who would live and die in the coming year, who would marry, bear children, wax rich, enjoy good health, and they attempted to hold at bay, through sacrifices and other rites, the witches and goblins that ran amuck at the time, stealing infants, destroying crops, killing farm animals, and sometimes worse. Deirdre was the third and youngest daughter of the Druid King Gwynwyll. Her hair was sandy brown with amber highlights, her eyes sea green, her complexion cream and wild rose. She was already taller than her older sisters, and her early development had been the cause of much concern in the tribal community. The other virgins tittered with envy. The married women voiced disapproval and counseled her mother to marry her off before the girl yielded to her budding impulses. The young warriors eyed her yearningly, and the old warriors thought forbidden thoughts and reflected on their faded memories. His name was Enda. He was 15, and he loved Deirdre with a secret passion that tortured him, and at night caused him to cry out in his sleep. When it became rumored that Deirdre's father, the king, was preparing to offer her hand in marriage, Enda consulted his kinsmen and asked if they thought his suit would be looked upon in favor. He suspected what the answer would be, but his longing overcame his embarrassment. "Oh, Deirdre marry you," his father cackled, "with your shriveled arm and your twitching mouth." For Enda had presented himself wrong in first when his mother birthed him, and the midwives had made a botch of his delivery. "She would be as soon marry my goat," howled his uncle. "Our Bellic," his brother added, pointing to the runty dog, worrying a greasy bone in the corner of their hut. "Besides," said his father, "I'm told she's but betrothed to Coolin." "Now there's a lad worthy of that wench's pretty hole," his uncle burst out, raising his wineskin to his fat lips. And they continued to discuss Deirdre's charms as Enda retreated miserably from the hut into the cold night. The boy suffered tortures such as only the adolescent can. At length he determined on a plan. If he could somehow get directly to Deirdre, he would convince her that though he was ill-favored physically, he was in every other respect a fitting candidate for her hand. This was easier said than done, however, because virgins were closely watched by their mothers or by truculent warrior brothers. Nevertheless, one day Enda seized an opportunity when Deirdre went to fetch water from the stream at the foot of the hill. He followed her furtively, darting from tree to tree, until he found her stooped over the stream, singing softly to herself as the water filled her clay pitchers. "Deirdre?" he called timidly. She turned and held her breath, eyes round with fright. "You? What do you want?" Her body tensed and she seemed ready to bolt. I want to. The panic in her face alarmed him. He had expected to startle her, but had not imagined she would greet him with such revulsion. He stepped forward, hand extended pacifically. But she jumped back, misinterpreting the gesture. She stumbled, almost falling into the stream, and Enda moved swiftly to rescue her. "No!" she shrieked. "Get away from me, monster!" She found her feet and burst into a run, crying, "Help! Help! He means to rape me!" Enda's body had been deformed at birth, but not until that moment had his soul been formed. And now it was Samhain, and Enda, humiliated beyond reason, stood on the perimeter of the celebrants, dancing and chanting around the bonfire. In his left hand he held a fat wineskin, from which he drank often. In his right he held a foot-long butcher blade, which he used to cut the throats of pigs and chickens. His eyes were fixed bitterly on the figures of Deirdre and Culain, whirling exuberantly around the fire, to the immense approval of the tribe, for their betrothal had been announced to the joy and relief of all. Enda's legs shook, and his body trembled in the cold night, though the heat of the fire was intense. And when the couple paraded past him once more, he leapt like a wildcat on his twin prey. Unarmed, their elbows linked, they didn't have a chance. Enda's blade sliced easily through Culain's jugular and windpipe. His legs kicked out in a grotesque finale to his dance of life. Then he fell like a slaughtered bull, dragging Deirdre downward. Her head turned away. She laughed, believing that her drunken partner had merely stumbled. Enda's blade caught her with laughter on her face, the same laughter that had mocked him after she had run safely into the arms of her tribesmen the day he had approached her at the stream. The highly honed weapon plunged into her breast up to the hilt. In the clamor, no one heard the explosion of wind from her lungs, the gurgle of blood, the whimper, or saw the look of dreadful recognition as the light faded from her eyes, except for Enda. The thrill of revenge was the last emotion Enda knew. For a moment later, he was literally torn apart by the enraged tribe. Only his head and his heart were preserved, gathered upon after the frenzy had subsided, at the request of the grieving king. After Deirdre and Culain were buried on the hallowed ground the following day, Enda's head and heart were carried to the summit of the Hill of Fiends, where cowards and other outcasts were left to rot unblessed. The king asked his shaman to pronounce a special curse over the remains of this vile murderer. "Thy soul shall roam the earth till the end of time, reliving thy foul deed and thy foul punishment. And may the god Makola visit every affliction upon thy spirit forevermore." The sky darkened and lightning flashed. The day suddenly grew black and cold, and out of nowhere, gusts of snow lashed the tribal party. In the history of the tribe, it had never snowed so early in the year. Satisfied that Makola had heard his prayer, the shaman summoned his people to turn their backs on Enda and return to their bereft village. The celebration of Samhain Eve was transmuted over the centuries. The invading Romans carried the tradition back from the English Isles, with them in the form of the harvest festival of Pomona, and the early Christians deemed their celebration Hallowmas. The popes of the Middle Ages consecrated November 1st as All Saints' Day, and All Hallows' Eve slurred into Halloween as the holiday was transmuted over the next millennium. With the coming of modern civilization, the superstitions and traditions of the original festival lost their meaning and vitality. Token recognition could be seen in the custom of lighting candles in jack-o'-lanterns, hanging effigies of witches and goblins outside homes, and playing good-natured pranks that were a feeble cry from the mayhem of the olden times. Children paraded about in costumes whose significance had long ago lost their correspondence to the terror of evil that had once gripped the world at the onset of winter. Halloween, like many of the holidays, had become an empty shame, except that, from time to time, the innocent frolic of All Hallows' Eve was shattered by some brutal and inexplicable crime, and the original spirit of the celebration was brought home to a horrified world. Then the people would bolt their doors. Scant good it did them, and besides, there were always the unwary. Chapter 1. It was 1963, and America was sure of itself, or at least seemed to be, particularly in Haddonfield, Illinois. The tensions of the Cold War of Cuba, the dark stirrings in Southeast Asia, lapped at the door of this placid and undistinguished Midwestern town, but didn't really touch it. In less than a month the president would be murdered in Dallas, signaling an era of tremendous violence and heartbreak that would reach deeply into the homes and hearts of Americans across the land. But that was in the future, and tonight, October 31st, was a time for fun. It was Halloween. Perhaps even more than Christmas, it was the most innocent holiday on the calendar. Yes, more than Christmas, because Christmas celebrated a happy event, and Jolly St. Nick was a benevolent symbol anyway. But Halloween's origins were darker, very much darker, and if the children celebrated it as a happy event like Christmas, it was a symptom of how far we'd come from the time when mankind respected the forces of evil. Little Michael Myers' grandmother clucked her disapproval as the visiting rosy-faced 6-year-old showed her the costume in the Woolworth box. "What's that supposed to be?" she said, leaning forward in her recliner and adjusting her specs. "A clown, Grandma." He ran his hand over the red and green nylon jester's costume with matching cap. "A clown," she sighed. "Now, Mother," Michael's mother Edith came to the rescue, "I know what you're going to say." "Well, it's true, damn it. We never had that 5 and dime junk when we grew up on the farm. We took Halloween seriously. Why, when we set up scarecrows and jack-o'-lanterns, it was because we were genuinely trying to scare off the boogeyman. Boogeyman. Now, he played real pranks, did some real damage. He didn't just go around like they do today, slapping people's clothes with socks filled with chalk dust and soap in their winders." "What did the boogeyman do, Grandma?" Mrs. Myers shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Now, I don't think Michael wants to hear that, Mom," she said, looking significantly at her mother. "It might give him bad dreams." But Grandma wasn't taking the warning. "Nothing wrong with bad dreams. At least they remind us that things aren't hunky-dory in this world. Lord, everything is so clean and phony these days. Just one big television commercial. Clown costumes," she sighed, fingering the cheap material in the Woolworth box. "What did the boogeyman do?" Michael insisted. The silver-haired woman leaned forward confidently, a perverse smile lighting her pleasantly lined face. "Well, if you were lucky, you got away with nothing worse than finding some of your chickens beheaded." "Beheaded?" "Their heads cut off," she explained with a relish. Michael's eyes widened. His mother grimaced and picked up a copy of Look, rifling nervously through it. "If you weren't lucky, you lost a cow or two." "Unheaded?" "Beheaded, yes." "Were the heads just lying there next to the cows, or were they—" Michael began to say before his mom cut him off. "Mother, that will be enough, really!" Mrs. Myers gasped, snapping the magazine shut. But Grandma had warmed to the subject. Behind her spectacles her blue eyes had drifted off to her girlhood, and her head nodded in memory of some awesome event. "Once he burned somebody's barn down. Was it Winfield? No, Winterfield. Burnt Mr. Winterfield's barn down to the ground, livestock and all." She looked at the wide-eyed boy, then at her horrified daughter, and realized she'd gone too far. "Of course, Michael. We always suspected it wasn't the boogeyman. Perhaps neighbors getting even with each other for some slight. In costumes and masks it was easier to get away with that sort of thing. But I do remember one incident." "Not the chimney story," begged Mrs. Myers.
"Oh, tell me the chimney story, Grandma,"
implored the grandson. "Well," the woman said, "it was Halloween, 1910.
"Just tell it,"
said Michael. Even at 6, he recognized a boring attack of Grandma's "What year was it again?" "Yes, it was Halloween, but way after midnight, maybe 2 or 3 in the morn. We'd all gone to sleep, leaving the fire burning in the parlor, because it was a terribly cold night. Well, suddenly I hear my brother Jimmy shouting, 'Smoke! Smoke! Wake up, everybody! The house is on fire!' I grabbed my robe and rushed down the stairs right behind my daddy, who'd picked up the bucket of water we always kept filled at the top of the landing. Sure enough, the whole downstairs was thick with wood smoke, but I couldn't see any fire. The smoke was coming from the fireplace, and it looked as though the flue had been closed."
"What's a flue?"
Grandma explained what a flue was. "We put out the embers and opened the doors and windows to let the smoke out. Then Daddy looked at the flue, and glory be, it was open. Something was jamming up the chimney. Now, we didn't have a ladder on account of Daddy having just taken it apart to replace some rotten rungs. So Jimmy had to shimmy himself up the drain pipe to find out what was obstructing the chimney."
"What was it?"
the boy asked, while his mother shook her head in painful anticipation. "A dead hog."
"Wow,"
Michael said. "Someone or something had cut out our hog's throat and laid it atop the chimney." She laughed humorlessly. "The thing is, that hog weighed near 300 pounds. How did it get up there without a ladder, without our hearing anything, without our dog Toby raising hob with his barking like he usually did when he heard something a-prowling, without disturbing a gate or making a footprint, mind you? Answer me that, Mr. Woolworth Clown Costume."
"I don't know."
"Well, I do. 'Twas the boogeyman, that's all there is to it."
"Mother, that will do," Mrs. Myers snapped. "The boy's been having problems enough at night without your adding to them."
"Problems? What kind? Michael, honey, run into the bedroom and try that costume on for Grandma. I'll tuck it if it's too baggy."
"It's supposed to be baggy,"
said the little boy, carrying the box into the next room. "Now what's this about problems?" she demanded of her daughter. Edith Myers, a younger, darker-eyed replica of her mother, ran a hand through her curly blonde hair.
"I told you. He's been getting into fights at school, at home too, with Judith. He's been wetting his bed again, which he hasn't done in 3 years.
"Fighting about what?"
"Mother, can we just forget?"
The old woman's eyes narrowed. "No, we can't. What kind of trouble is that boy in?"
"Voices,"
Mrs. Myers finally blurted after a minute's tortured pause.
"He hears voices, Mom."
"Oh, little Lord Jesus!" the old woman cried. She exchanged a long, meaningful look with her daughter. "I'm afraid to ask what these voices say."
"They tell me to say I hate people. That's how Michael put it when I asked him. Dawn thinks maybe we ought to send Michael to someone."
"You mean a psychiatrist?"
"Yes, Mom."
"I don't put much stock in psychiatrists, but I don't suppose it could hurt. And I don't think it'll help if it's what I'm thinking." The younger woman began to get agitated.
"I know what you're thinking, and that's why I didn't want to get into this with you. You're going to say that's how it started with Grandpa Nordstrom."
"We have to face it, child. That is how it started with your father's father."
"Mother, all children hear imaginary voices. Don't you remember my Bobby Bear, who used to—"
"It's not the same. At least it's not something you should ignore. Does the boy have dreams?" Her daughter nodded. "Does he remember any?"
"Yes, and they're very violent."
Her face reddened, and she turned her eyes away from her mother's piercing gaze.
"Mother, when Grandpa Nordstrom, that is, well, You've never spoken to us about that incident, and I think there are enough similarities."
"Hush! Here comes Michael. When you get home, call me as soon as you can. I think the time has come to tell you everything." "Oh, there's my little boy," she cooed as Michael came back into the room with a rustle. "Right out of a Punch and Judy show." He stood before them, an angel in red and green nylon, elastic ankle and wristbands making the costume cling at the extremities and bag out everywhere else. A ruff around the neck and the little droopy pom-pom cap completed the charming picture. "Grandma's baby," she laughed, clasping the boy to her bosom. "Edith, please fetch me some cold cream and lipstick from the tray in my bedroom. Might as well complete the picture."
"I don't want makeup," Michael protested.
"Of course you do. You don't want anyone to guess who you are when you go around playing pranks."
"I'm not gonna play pranks. I'm just gonna ask for candy."
"You do that, child. You just have an innocent Woolworth kind of Halloween." She saw them out the door. "Remember, Edith, call me as soon as you can."
"I will, Mother, and don't worry."
"I won't," she said, shutting the door.
She began to tremble, wondering if she should have said something to her daughter about Grandpa Nordstrom's dreams. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been the prologue and Chapter 1 of Halloween by Curtis Richards, based on the original screenplay of the 1978 slasher film Halloween. Guys, I was told ahead of time that this book is quite strange and doesn't really follow the mythology of the movies, or the first movie for that matter, a whole lot. And I think it might have been based off an earlier screenplay or something like that. But it's obvious from the prologue and that Chapter 1 there that, yeah, it's a bit different than what I expected going into a novelization of the movie Halloween from '78. I cannot wait to hear what you guys thought of the prologue and Chapter 1. If you're hearing this on the Patreon page, then Happy Halloween! This was your Halloween exclusive early access content, a special sneak peek for the patrons of the next book that will be narrated on the channel after New Nightmare. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you're listening sometime in November on YouTube, then I'll be back very soon with the next couple chapters of this book. Guys, either way, whether you're listening on Halloween or you're listening in November after New Nightmare is wrapped up, I really want to get you guys' take on what you heard tonight in the prologue and in Chapter 1. Like I said, this book is very strange so far, and it's not quite what I expected. But what do you guys think? I cannot wait to hear what your opinion on this book so far is. Tonight's upload was brought to you by the patrons on the Patreon page as of October 30th, 2019, and that is Carl Eakins, Catherine McClear, Cecilia Spears, and Sean Campbell. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel through Patreon. I greatly appreciate it. Well, guys, I'm getting ready for my Halloween festivities, so you all have a great one. I'm signing off. This has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, if you're listening on Patreon, then Happy Halloween! And if you're listening on YouTube in November, I'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.